Hey, what's up? It's KHG back again with some more Warhammer. Today we're not going to be exploring Astartes. We will get to that later. But right now, I want to get into what I would call the support units. The people who make the machines that drive the army. I'm talking about the Mechanicus. Now the best video that I can find that I believe that will give us enough information is by Luetin09. The trouble is his original video is 1 hour and 13 minutes. So this video is going to be chopped up into a bite-sized chunk. So there will be a part 1, 2, 3 possibly. Anyway, without further delay, let's find out who makes those floating skulls that creep me out so much. Yeah, let's get into the video. Darkness of the far future, there's only war. An audio glitch, that's on his side, not mine, y'all. Although flesh may blacken and fail, fear not, for this too can be replaced. You can be reincarnated, reborn, and still by the will of the omniscia, except from the first. I don't know what that word was. Sorry, y'all. I could read, I swear. The story of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars. See, it's not me. That was him. He had some kind of audio
The Adeptus
Mechanicus
are a rare, if not unique, entity within the Imperium of Man. They stand as one of the only organizations that was not cleansed and forcibly subjugated by the Emperor pre or post Great Crusade. In fact, without the Mechanicus, it's unlikely the Crusade would have even been possible. But what is the beginning, the middle, and the end of the Mechanicus story? What role does it play in the machinery of the galaxy-spanning Imperium of Man? In an age where so much has been lost, the tech priests maintain many essential items, including the powerful plasma reactors to the Golden Throne of Terror. They preserve knowledge from ages and tentatively explore science for the future. Now, unusually before we get into this, I need to clarify some definitions. Some of these may not make full sense until later explained or in context, but it's worth having a rough understanding. Also, these are often the pieces that are most commonly referred to incorrectly or mistakenly conflated.
I forgot to tell you, if you're new to Warhammer like me, either get a notepad or, bookmark this video, because you're going to have to go back. There will be a test. There will be a test.
Where they cannot be conflated. Even some official products ridiculously get some of these details quite regularly wrong. And I know that I'm not foolproof and that I don't often get everything right when it comes to the lore, because it's pretty complicated stuff most of the time, but seriously, a lot of this is pretty straightforward. Firstly, the Mechanicum and Adeptus Mechanicus both refer to the overall banner of the forces of Mars. It then more specifically breaks down its forces under that banner. The religion itself is a separate thing, but still comes within the banner of both of those, depending on what time period you're in. So these organizational terms of Mechanicum and Mechanicus refer to the title during either the founding period of around M25 through to the end of the Horus Heresy in M31. During the period of heresy, the Mechanicum would then split between the two sides of loyalist and heretic. This is why post-heresy, the Mechanicum would be forwardly known as the Adeptus Mechanicus. It's pretty simple, right? Mechanicum is pre-heresy, Adeptus Mechanicus is post-heresy. That's it. Really not that difficult to understand, but this error is the most commonly made. Then we have the term Cult Mechanicus, and this simply refers to the disciples of the machine god. It is the religion of the Mechanicum and later Adeptus Mechanicus, but it doesn't change. It's also referred to as the cult of the machine. Now, one thing that I have not to my own satisfaction been able to define is this. Was the Cult Mechanicus the Cult Mechanicum? Now, if you look at established narratives, which I have done, like the Heresy Book Mechanicum, it talks of the Cult Mechanicum, but then later in the 8th edition Mechanicus Codex under the period of Mechanicum, it talks only of the Cult Mechanicus. So did the naming of this group happen definitely as per the change from Mechanicum to Mechanicus, or did it happen more organically just by the passage of time? It's really unclear, as with many things in 40k, because sometimes the information just isn't there clear enough, stated ABC out and out. And you can rationalize, well, maybe the information was lost or destroyed or just never properly documented or whatever.
Okay, I gotta stop. Here's the thing. Everything that he's saying makes no sense. What do they call themselves? That's the thing. That is your definite answer. If they call themselves, or would correct you if you called it the opposite of what they call themselves, then you would know definitely. So instead of going by word of mouth, he just needs to find out what they call themselves.
Honestly, ultimately, it's actually not that important, strictly speaking, because the fundamentally important thing is that both refer to the followers of the Cult of the Machine. It does seem a fair assumption, though, that if pre-heresy the org was known as the Mechanicum, and it seems reasonable its followers would be the Cult of the Mechanicum, then later become Cult of Mechanicus when it changed. But again, the 8th edition Mechanicus Codex refers to Martians after overcoming disaster to unite under the Cult Mechanicus. That seems fairly established to me. But like I say, you can look at a number of varying supplements on this all over the place. It's also easy to see why people get these things mixed up. They all sound kind of similar, and often people forget about the specific dates, and we might be talking about one time period but actually referencing the current organization, so it all gets a bit muddled up. Hopefully, though, you have
Whoop-de-doo! What does it all mean, Basil?
enough info on this to have a rough idea of what we're talking about when it comes to the Mechanicus. Like I say, fairly straightforward. Mechanicum is basically any time before the end of the Horus Heresy. Mechanicus, Adeptus Mechanicus, is usually after that point. Cult Mechanicus refers to the religion, which can be any time throughout the entire period. That's basically it. So where in time do we begin? We must first return to the time known as the Dark Age of Technology. This, of course, was the period from M15 to M25, where mankind's scientific and technological abilities were at the absolute highest. And some specific dates for you: M18 is known as the second Dark Age of Technology, as warp drives were created in this time, and M22 is the third Dark Age of Technology, as navigators were being used to make longer, faster warp jumps, and also the STC technology was now heavily being used, allowing faster and more powerful human expansion of the galaxy.
Okay, are we paying attention? That's M12, 18, 21, I believe, and STCs. Need to write this down. There will be a test.
Now, unsurprisingly, information about this time is very sparse and fragmented, and even more fabled now. While this was surely a golden age for mankind, it is now subsequently regarded by the Imperium and the Mechanicus as the Dark Times, because of the catastrophic impact these highly advanced technologies would ultimately unintentionally unleash upon humanity. And this is why the Imperium generally, until most recently, considers scientific experimentation, advancement and development extremely dangerous and is very skeptical about it. Because the unchecked high advancement of technology during the Dark Age of Technology almost allowed for the complete and total extinction of humanity as a species. It's also why the Imperium uses human-machine hybrid servitors instead of true AI machines. So when people ask why is the Imperium so resistant to tech and new tech and research, the answer is not something as straightforward as just it never happens, but it's much more that they are extremely cautious and generally do not seek the hyper-advancement that humanity once saw as the pinnacle of achievement. Also, much of what exists is already extremely powerful, and so currently just maintaining this has been good enough up until now. During the Dark Age of Technology, Mars had already been long since colonized and terraformed, which was easily within the capability of humanity during this time. It had an atmosphere and a flourishing environment. It was no longer a red, dead world. In the early days of the Dark Age of Tech, around M15 to 18, only sublight travel was possible, and so because of the significant distance from Earth in the early history of space exploration, it's believed that this separation allowed for Mars to develop a somewhat separate society in that it was both culturally and technologically different. This would later then be heavily exacerbated by certain events. Now, Mars also existed independently from Earth, but it was part of the interstellar government that humanity had created during the time of galactic expansion, and so Earth and Mars worked together to create the project that would send out fleet after fleet of colony ships into the galaxy. These ships, with their vast technological wealth, later in the form of the very powerful STCs, along with them everything a human colony would require. This resulted in the creation of hundreds of thousands of new human colonies all across the galaxy. But then would come the Age of Strife. And the Age of Strife features multiple events. It's not simply just one thing that happened. In the early years, a major event would take place from M23 that effectively would begin the Age of Strife, known as the Cybernetic Revolt. This was where the AI creations of humanity from the Golden Age, known as the Men of Iron, would unleash horrific and world-ending devastation to such a degree that mankind would be crippled beyond repair, despite its incredibly advanced technology. And this period is often visualized incorrectly as just some kind of standard warfare. The Men of Iron utilized not only themselves as a war of machine constructs, but also devices that could destroy suns, extract entire continents from planets, and plagues of nano-machines that would ravage entire worlds.
Okay, I'm deeply confused right now. We have already went through the dark ages of technology, and this is supposed to be current millennium 23. Millenniums are 1,000 years. You're talking about anywhere from 5 to 3,000 years ago, they made a mistake and invented AI and almost brought humanity down to non-existence. Then they redid it, and this time built Ultron. I'm confused.
It is believed the Men of Iron were eventually destroyed not solely by humanity, but by an alliance of galactic powers. Because records are so fragmented from the Age of Strife, we can't be sure, but it is believed that it was not a sole human effort. There may have been other forces, likely non-human, involved in destroying and ending this period of war against the Men of Iron. So around the end of Millennium 24 and the beginning of 25, mankind's federation was still struggling to recover from the disastrous war against the Men of Iron. Its far-reaching impact on the previously secure and strong human colonies had now significantly weakened them. With galactic unity destroyed, as well as suffering from the inevitable wounds of war, material shortages, mass loss of life, and destruction of infrastructure, humanity would now face a new problem. Warp travel was becoming increasingly difficult. These two things, the devastation caused by the war with the Men of Iron, combined with now being unable to travel easily through the warp, and thereby cross the vast distances of space, the galaxy would effectively now return to a pre-Dark Age of technology state where only sublight travel was possible. This meant that all human colonies were now entirely on their own. This was obviously a catastrophic disaster. Trade and support could no longer be conducted, as the journeys would now take many generations to complete. Humanity was once again isolated as it had been millennia before, and the warp storms and the isolation they would create.
Let me stop. That is an awesome sight. A space shuttle that never took off, that has been resting there so long that it has gathered enough dust to look like a shuttle encased in a mountain. That would be something to see.
Would last for roughly 4,000 years, and their effect on human society across the galaxy was, as we say, catastrophic. Some planets with a significantly advanced, more self-sufficient colony would survive into the future if they had the means to also defend and support themselves. Some worlds would be cut off, but with other, sometimes multiple human colonized planets within the reach of their sublight travel, and so they were able to maintain some level of trade and support for one another. It's important to consider that when a symbiotic trade relationship is set up with no means of backup, its collapse has an immediate and profound impact. And this was the case with mankind's trade system. It had grown over time to enable many planets to survive solely on imports from other rich parts of the human federation. Without this infrastructure and no way to gain outside support, disaster was inevitable. Many worlds would survive for a time somewhat unscathed depending on the resources that they required, while others would very quickly turn inwardly to the colony, with social order falling apart, families fighting between one another, and quickly discontent turning to anarchy, turning to cannibalizing anything they could lay their hands on, and the colony then consuming itself from the inside out. First often with increasing barbarism, and ultimately a pure survival of the fittest apocalypse-style situation, with survivors scavenging and killing each other over the scarce resources that remained. The final phase often led the significantly depleted population to either a total state of disorder and survivalism, or in the best case scenario, a feudal system of warlords and small communities eking out the bare bones of survival. This depressing chaos was repeated across the majority of human worlds in this period, including Earth, whose ecosystem had long since collapsed and was wholly reliant on imports as the hub center of the human trading system.
Where was the Emperor of Mankind during this? When did he reveal himself to mankind? What millennium was that?
Now, this whole situation might sound unbelievable, that backups would not be in place to prevent such an immense and speedy societal collapse, and to such a severe degree, especially for a society that was so advanced. But it's worth considering that in this time, human society had built itself up to be so strong in belief of its own invincibility, such arrogance that they could resolve any issue that came their way. They simply didn't anticipate the severity of the warp storms or how this would debilitate the trade and support systems they had been relying upon. And human history is littered with examples of such sheer arrogance outweighing logic and reason, as well as blindly staring down dangerous facts in favour of belief in our own self-importance, of not wanting to face the realization of the truth.
I disagree with what he said. The whole thing is, and let me use this analogy because it just popped in my head real quick. Do you trust the tires on your car? Okay. The warp was there. We trusted in it. Even if we could predict when it was going to fail, which I don't believe we could have because outside forces made it fail, it was good while it lasted. It got us where we needed to go, and you know, a human life is only, what, 100 years at most? Yeah, that's as far as any human thinks about what's going on. You know, you can't make a backup plan for millions of light years. Like, what is the alternate thing for the warp? What is it? Should we have just stayed home because, you know, there is no backup plan?
By allowing subsequent lack of easy planning when it came to losing the infrastructure was an acute example of this human arrogance, not to mention that the Men of Iron had heavily damaged many human worlds, so even those who may have been able to survive reasonably before that were crippled so severely and in such a weakened state to withstand suddenly being deprived of resources seemed extremely unlikely. And then worse was to come, as demons from the warp would begin possessing previously undetected psykers across the worlds of humanity, and even on many worlds where psykers had already been encouraged to advance and train their abilities. They would now be exploited by the creatures of the warp, who would unleash hellish nightmares onto the already badly weakened human colonies. To compound issues, orcs then as well would sense the weakened human colonies and begin to assault them with savage mass genocide across planets that lacked the resources and defenses to withstand the wave of green ultra violence. The Age of Strife for humanity was nothing short of a complete and total disaster. But here is where we go sideways from the main story, because whilst the rest of humanity was literally tearing itself apart or being torn apart by Xenos, Mars itself had a different story to tell. Yet to be sure, it did not escape the anarchy, far from it. Now, the population of Mars at this time, due to the ensuing confusion and chaos caused by the Age of Strife, would end up splitting into factions and becoming preoccupied by more local and urgent matters leaving behind their duties of care, similarly to many human colonies all across the galaxy were doing. On Mars though, this lack of attendance to the machines and systems that subsequently enabled Mars to maintain its atmosphere fell into disrepair and ceased to function. Its radiation shields would subsequently break down, leaving its terraformed ecosystem to then be annihilated by solar radiation. Mars would once again in fairly short order become a barren red desert planet. Undoubtedly, the raging civil war didn't help matters, as the deadly weapons combined with the now unrestrained solar radiation caused, among other things, plagues that would then kill most of the civilian population. Most of the survivors who had been somehow able to survive all of this on the surface were now nightmarishly deformed mutants, gross parodies of human form, unable to speak in a recognizable language and surviving by just scavenging and cannibalizing any organic material they would find. More often than not, that organic material was other Martian colonists. This though was sadly not unusual for many human worlds across the galaxy during the Age of Strife, when total and complete collapse of civilization occurred for many planets that had become lazily reliant on complex trading networks to sustain them, and without this turned inwardly, tearing themselves apart in disorganized frustration and panic. The civilian chaos, environmental and social collapse, as well as the later near-total loss of the population, is where the rise of the Mechanicum and the subsequent cult of the machine begins. The minority of the population, both civilian and engineers, who were able to remain in a fairly uncompromised state, would retreat into the minimal amount of underground factories of Mars that had long produced much of the technology and machines required for humanity's previously expansionist agenda. It had been, without the title, very much still the first major forge world for mankind. The only citizens...
I'm going to say this because it needs to be said. We started out talking about the Mechanicus, then we went into a lot of wars. Now we're actually back on Mars talking about the Mechanicus. Yeah. This whole video is out of order. This whole court is out of order.
Being able to survive for long periods of time, having retreated underground, would be those who are able to restore the oxygen generation systems and then to hastily forge together devices to protect themselves from the radiation storms now lashing the surface of Mars. The only ones able to do this would be the advanced engineers and technicians that would hereafter come to be known by their followers as the Tech Priests. They were the most critical of individuals for obvious reasons. They could keep the machines running that enabled survival. Marauding bands of mutants would sometimes invade and even destroy these hastily reinforced bunkers, and many early Mechanicum cultists would die in these struggles. But in doing so, these incursions would strengthen the others' survival resolve. The fact they're able to survive in the face of the apparently insurmountable odds would only continue to reinforce their desperate sense of devotion to a burgeoning cult, that of the cult of the machine, making it ever more unshakable. The early Mechanicum was quite literally a religion of survival that depended on knowledge, and survival that depended on the strength of machines. As generations passed in these underground bunkers, technology was no longer taught to be understood by many, but instead to be worshipped. Quests would begin to hunt for technological artifacts, where tech priests would brave the toxic poisons and irradiated surface of the planet to search for both tech and any knowledge that could be acquired. These years represented the birth of the Mechanicum and the cult of the machine, the belief that knowledge was a manifestation of divinity. Tech priests would lead their followers to the divine trinity of the machine god, the omnisire, and the motive force, the source of all power and life in the galaxy.
Anyway, I'm gonna end the video right there. I think we're at about like 25 minutes into the video out of 73 minutes of the video. So far I am more confused about the Mechanicus than ever. Like he jumped around so much, I don't even know what age Mars' atmosphere actually died, causing this. Now I'm thinking it was because of the Men of Iron, but where did they come from? I would have sworn the Mechanicus were the ones who created it. Or was it the technologists or mechanics on Earth? What planet did the AI that caused the Men of Steel to appear and ravage the universe? So many questions left to be answered, but we'll get into that in the next video. Anyway, you could have been anywhere watching anything, but you were here with me. So I thank you. Till next time, I'm KHG. Peace. Elon Musk, I think you need to watch this video. Could be a precursor to what may come. I got a screwdriver. Can that be a part of the Adeptus Mechanicus? I have duct tape, needle nose pliers, and a flathead screwdriver. This officially makes me head mechanicus.
You need help.